Decision-Making Act of 2011 is a start. And I think the next generation is worth the investment of time on the part of our members to look at this legislation and to get behind it. I thank the President. I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
Senator from New York.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. First, I would just like to talk a little bit about the upcoming FEMA bill. As I understand it, the House intends to send us a CR with FEMA funding only at the level of $3.65 billion, which is a level that is completely inadequate to meet FEMA's needs. They intend to put $1 billion in for 2011, which is more than is actually needed in 2011, but then they ask it be paid for with $1.5 billion, which is not the way mathematics is supposed to work. But the real problem is the total amount of $3.65 is inadequate, given the terrible tragedies that we have had over the last several months and several years. We're still rebuilding from Katrina. The Joplin tornado was devastating. And, of course, the storms that hit the Northeast, including my beloved state of New York, are just awful. It's estimated that just in New York State alone, cleanup could now cost, all the costs would be closer to $2 billion. So you can imagine that $3.65 billion is not even close to enough. The good news is that what we intend to do here under Leader Reid's leadership is to take the CR they send us and add to it the very bill that passed last Thursday night, which adds approximately $7 billion to FEMA, That's the amount of money that's needed. It adds some money to the Army Corps of Engineers, to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and other places that the governors of the states have told us are needed. And given the fact that 10 Republicans voted for it, we have every expectation that that amendment will pass and we will send it back to the House. So the House should understand that there will be a measure to adequately fund FEMA, and we will do that this week. And again, we have every expectation that the 10 senators will vote for the 10 Republican senators who voted with us last time, Thursday night, will cast the same vote on the same exact measure, because the disasters in their states are not any less this week than they were last week. The other thing I'd like to address, Madam President, is the President's proposal on budget deficit, particularly on the tax side. There are so many arguments being tossed around by many of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Yesterday, the President put forward a blueprint for the Joint Committee to consider this fall, and it included a very common-sense principle, and that is that those very few among us fortunate enough to make over $1 million a year should pay the same effective tax rates at the end of the day as middle-class households. A number of Republicans rejected the President's plan before he even announced it, as soon as it was suggested that we should ask the wealthiest few among us to pay their fair share. Many on the other side began labeling it class warfare. Apparently, they think they can slap that old label on the President's proposal and be done with it. But their refusal to address the proposal on the merits is revealing. They know they will lose any argument about the policy itself, because it makes sense economically and because the American people support it. Even Republicans in the country, 59% in a recent poll I saw, support the wealthiest among us paying fair share, support not giving them the continued Bush tax break at a time when we have record deficits and we're asking everybody else to sacrifice. And emphatically, this is not class warfare. It's not class warfare to fight for the middle class. That's for sure. It's not class warfare to say that we need funding for roads and bridges, for teachers, and that the wealthiest among us should pay their fair share to do it. Now, let me ask a question, Madam President. Is it class warfare when Republicans advocate tax cuts for the wealthy? Do we call those class warfare? The debate about the progressivity of the tax code has been one that has existed for over 100 years in this country, and there are different policy prescriptions. Most Democrats and most Americans believe that the wealthy don't pay their fair share. That is not to begrudge the money they have made. There are lots of wealthy citizens in my state, and I'm proud of them. I'm proud that they made a lot of money, and many of them believe that they should pay fair share. It's not just Warren Buffett. It is not class warfare to do that. It is not class warfare to advocate tax cuts for the wealthy or tax increases for the middle class. That's not class warfare. And to try and call it this name is unfair. Let me make a second point. We have a need to do this. The President is not proposing things like the Buffett rule out of vengeance. He said yesterday, it's not because anybody looks forward to the prospects of raising taxes or paying more taxes. But we do have a consensus that has been reached here. It's one of the few. That is, we should reduce the deficit. We all know we have to. There are two ways to do it. One is by cutting spending. And when we cut spending, it hurts middle-class citizens. Middle-class citizens need help to pay for college. Wealthy people don't. So if you cut student loans or Pell Grants or Stafford loans that go to the middle class, it's not going to affect wealthy citizens. They can afford college themselves, but it affects the middle class. When you cut Medicare, it doesn't hurt the wealthy. They can afford any doctor, hospital they want. God bless them. They've earned their money. They deserve that. We don't have a system that mandates everyone has the same. But it sure hurts the middle class. So the bottom line is very simple. If everyone has to pay their fair share so we can get the deficit down, the only way the wealthy pay their fair share is by making sure that their tax rates are at least the same as average Americans and perhaps should be a little bit higher. There's a choice. We don't do this because we want to raise taxes. Certainly not because we think the wealthy have gotten unfair advantage. That's a different argument. We do it, and I don't believe that. I'm proud when New Yorkers or Americans climb the ladder up and make a lot of money due to hard work and their ideas. We do it because we don't want to lay off more teachers. We don't want to see our infrastructure crumble. We don't want to say we can't create jobs, and yet we don't want to increase deficit spending. And the only way, if you want to keep the deficit down, but keep our schools good and our infrastructure good and our basic research good, the only way to do it is ask the wealthy to pay a fair share. That's why we do it. That's not class warfare. That's a policy debate which we welcome. Finally, I'd say one other thing. I think our Republican colleagues, from a political point of view, I just want to sum up that point. Either we ask big oil companies to give up special subsidies or we gut education or medical research. Either we ask the wealthiest Americans to pay their fair share or we're going to have to ask seniors to pay more for Medicare. We can't do both if we want to keep the deficit in line. And middle-class Americans know this. We know their median income is declining. We know that the only place on the economic spectrum where incomes are going up is the very highest end, and we know that the right policy is to make those folks at the high end pay a fair share. One final point, Madam President. My colleagues are in for a rude awakening. I've talked to a couple of the people who study the polling data and what average Americans think. Let me tell you what the average American thinks when they hear the term class warfare. They think it means war on the middle class, and they think it means that the wealthy get away with things and they don't. So when our colleagues talk about class warfare, maybe it resonates with a few on the hard right, among the very wealthy, who don't want to pay any taxes at all. We've heard from them, Lord knows, enough in this place. But to the middle class, it means that the middle class is being beleaguered, not being helped, and even being attacked by such circumstances beyond their control. So when we say that the wealthiest should pay their fair share, middle-class Americans will not see that as class warfare. They will not. They will understand what we're doing. And I am so glad that the President has decided to take this fight to the American people. It's a fight where we are on their side. That's what all my experience shows. When I go around New York, that's what it shows. And the polling data shows. And we are doing what's right for the future of this country and for our children and grandchildren. So let's have the debate. And let's dispel this idea that simply because you want the wealthy to pay your fair share, you dislike them, it's class warfare, it's negative towards them. It's not. It's the right thing to do for all Americans, to make the pie grow in America and not have the various parts of America fight with one another because Medicare is being cut, teachers are being cut, and the deficit is going up and hurting our children and grandchildren. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from Illinois.
I ask unanimous consent. I have 7 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet today during session of the Senate with the approval of the majority and minority leaders, and I ask unanimous consent these requests be agreed to and printed in the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, I want to thank my colleague from New York, and I'd like to ask how much time is remaining in morning business on the Democratic side.
19 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Let me thank my colleague from New York for his statement about the challenges we face. I have been involved for over a year and a half in deficit reduction talks on a bipartisan basis with the Bowles-Simpson Commission, the Gang of 6, now the Gang of 38, I believe was the last number of Democratic and Republican senators who have publicly stated that they are willing to move forward in a process based on the principles of the Bowles-Simpson Commission. At a time when most Americans have given up hope that Congress will ever work on a bipartisan basis to solve our problems. I hope that our effort will be viewed as positive and helpful to the supercommittee's work. We are doing everything we can to make sure that they are successful, and they have a very difficult assignment and a difficult timetable. In the meantime, though, I understand, as the senator from New York, my colleague, spoke earlier, that if we are serious about deficit reduction, it not only must involve cuts in spending, but it also must involve revenue and a serious look at the future of entitlement programs. Currently, Social Security, untouched, will pay every promised benefit for the next 25 years with a cost-of-living adjustment. Then it runs into trouble, 22% cuts in benefits if we don't do something. The same cannot be said for Medicare. As strong as it is, as important as it is, it has about 12 years of solvency before we have to do something significant. Medicaid, which is a very critical health insurance program for millions of Americans, is threatened by state revenue declines and all of the problems that we have here in Washington with our own deficit. And so these three entitlement programs need to be viewed in an honest context to keep them strong, to protect the basic benefit structure that underlies each of these bills and laws, and we need to do that as well. We need to put it all on the table, Madam President. It's spending cuts, it's revenue, it's entitlement reform. It all has to come together. And when the President says that the wealthiest among us should be willing to help us through this crisis by sharing part of the burden, that's not unreasonable. I have yet to hear the Republican plan for getting this economy moving forward. It appears that they have no plan and are dedicated only to protecting those with the highest incomes in America. That is not a recipe for success. It may be somebody's idea of a campaign platform, but it isn't a platform to build the economy. I also heard this morning when the Republican leader came to the floor, Senator McConnell, and talked about the need to pass trade agreements. I have voted for trade agreements. I believe that the United States, its workers and businesses can compete in this world successfully if the rules are fair and we're given a chance at the markets. And I voted for trade agreements in the past. The senator from Kentucky asked for us to pass more as soon as possible. But he did say something which caught my attention, and I quote him. In a moment when 14 million Americans are looking for work, Senator McConnell said it's indefensible for the White House to demand a vote on trade adjustment assistance as a condition for action. I couldn't believe my ears when I heard that. Trade adjustment assistance is designed to put people back to work who've lost their jobs because of trade agreements. So it is totally defensible, totally consistent, and an important part of economic recovery. Madam President, the Alliance for American Manufacturing released a report this morning that 2.8 million jobs have been lost or displaced in America between 2001 and 2010 due to our growing trade deficit with China. 2.8 million jobs. So as we speak about expanding trade adjustment assistance so that those who've lost their jobs to non-free trade agreement countries like India and China, we are talking about putting Americans back to work. This should not be viewed as an obstacle, a diversion, or inconsistent with economic recovery. I couldn't follow the logic of the Senate Republican leader this morning when he was talking about trade adjustment assistance being indefensible at a time of high unemployment. It is totally defensible, totally consistent with putting Americans back to work. For the record, since 2009, trade adjustment assistance has provided assistance to 447,235 workers in America who've been displaced due to trade agreements. It helps their families with income, with health care, with opportunities for retraining and education. Madam President, I ask that the second part of my remarks be placed at a separate part in the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, it was 10 years ago when I introduced the DREAM Act. It's an important piece of legislation for thousands of people living in America who are literally without status, without a country. The DREAM Act says if you came to the U.S. as a child, if you're a long-term U.S. resident, if you have good moral character, if you graduated from high school, and you're prepared to complete 2 years of college or enlist in our military, we will give you a chance to be legal in America. That's what it says. And the young people who are affected by it are many times people who've never known another country in their lives. They got up at school, as Senator Menendez has said so artfully. They pledged allegiance to the only flag they've ever known. They sing the only national anthem they know. They speak English and want a future in America, and yet they have no country. Because their parents brought them to this country as children, because their parents did not file the necessary papers, they are without a country and without a future. And the DREAM Act gives them a chance to excel and prove that they can make this a better nation. Now, the Obama administration recently made an announcement that I think is not only the right thing to do, but really paves the way for us to give these young people a chance. We think we have 10 million undocumented people in America, and it's very clear the Department of Homeland Security is not going to deport 10 million people. That's physically impossible, nor should we. I certainly would be opposed to that notion. But what they're trying to do is to remove those people from America who are undocumented that pose a threat to our nation. They've been criticized by some. The deportations under the Obama administration are even higher than the Bush administration. They have tried to go after those with criminal records and those who really are not going to be a benefit to the United States, and I think that is the right approach to use. But they said recently that they were going to make it clear that those eligible for the DREAM Act, these young people, good moral character, graduates of high school, and those who are pursuing college degrees are not going to be their targets. They have limited resources. They're going after the people who could threaten our country, those whom we don't want in the United States. I think that was the right thing to do. And I think that that was a policy consistent with keeping America strong and building for America's future. But we need to do more. In addition to having a sensible policy when it comes to deportation, we need a sensible immigration policy. And I think it starts with the DREAM Act. Madam President, I've come to the floor many times and told the stories about the young people who would be affected by the DREAM Act. Let me tell you two stories this morning that I think are illustrative of why this is morally important and important for us as a nation to consider as quickly as possible. This wonderful young lady whom I've met is named Mandeep Shahal. She was brought to the United States from India 14 years ago when she was 6 years old. Today, Mandeep is 20. She is an academic all-star. She is an honors pre-med student at the University of California, Davis, where she's majoring in neurology, physiology, and behavior. Mandeep has also been dedicated to public service. In high school, she helped to found an organization known as $1 for Life for poverty relief around the world. She was voted the member of her class most likely to save the world. At her college, Mandeep is the co-president of STAND, an anti-genocide group. Mandeep has so much to offer America, but unfortunately, she was placed in deportation proceedings earlier this year. Mandeep and her friends responded the way many young people do today. They went to Facebook and asked for help. The response was amazing. 20,000 people sent faxes to the Department of Homeland Security to save this young lady from deportation. On the day she was scheduled to be deported, she was granted a one-year stay. Her first thought was to try to prevent other people from going through what she had just experienced. So just a week after her deportation was suspended, she came here to the U.S. Capitol, where I had an opportunity to meet her. She spoke publicly about her experience, and she called for the deportations of all DREAM Act students to be suspended. I met her while she was here and asked her to explain to me why she wants to stay. She said, "I'll send you a letter," and she did. And here's what it said. "I've spent 14 years in the United States and consider it my only home. My family, friends, and future are in the United States, which is where I belong. My dream is to become a pediatrician so I can treat the most helpless and innocent among us. I hope to serve families in low-income communities who are otherwise unable to afford medical care. I wish to remain in the United States so that I can continue to make a positive difference and give back to the community that has given me so much." Would America be better off if we deported Mandeep Shahal back to India? I don't think so. She left that country when she was 6 years old. In her heart, she is an American. She just wants a chance to prove it and to make this a better nation. Now let me introduce to you one other person whom I've also met, another wonderful story. Fanny Martinez, brought to the United States from Mexico 9 years ago when she was 13. She lives in Addison in the state of Illinois, straight A student in high school. Earlier this year, she graduated summa cum laude at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois, with a major in sociology. This month, she's beginning to work on a master's degree at the University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy. Keep in mind, these students who are excelling get no help, none, from the federal government. If you think college is a burden now for those who borrow the money or are given the grants, most of these students have to earn the money if they're going to go through school. Let me tell you something else about Fanny Martinez. She's married to David Martinez, who has served in the U.S. Army Reserves for the last 8 years. Here's a picture of the two of them together. David is currently deployed to Afghanistan, putting his life on the line for our country. And yet his worry is not just the enemy in Afghanistan. His worry is that his wife, Fanny, is going to be deported while he's serving overseas. Fanny sent me a letter, and here's what she said about her situation. My husband is constantly worried about my status in this country. He knows I'm always at risk of being placed in deportation proceedings, and he's afraid of not having his wife with him when he comes home from Afghanistan. The passage of the DREAM Act will give me the confidence to live without fear and frustration. It will allow me and my husband to plan our future without having to deal with the possibility of deportation and lack of opportunity. I care about my community, Fanny wrote, and I know that I can help improve society if I'm allowed to remain in the United States and am given lawful permanent residence. David Martinez, her husband, is willing to give his life for our country. We should give him and his wife, Fanny, a chance to pursue their dreams, the American dream. I don't know that I've ever dealt with an issue that has meant so much to me personally, because there isn't a place I go in America, anywhere, that I don't have some young person come up and look me in the eye and say, I'm a dreamer, I'm counting on you. Well, they're counting not just on me, but they're counting on the Senate, they're counting on the Congress, they're counting on our government and our nation to step up and realize that this is the morally right thing to do and that these dynamic, wonderful young people will make this a better nation. I urge my colleagues, please put partisanship aside, support the DREAM Act. It's the right thing to do for the future of our nation. And I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President,
The Majority Leader.
it's my understanding the majority has...
The Senate is in a quorum call.
I'm sorry, I ask consent the call quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
It's my understanding this majority still has a few minutes left on morning business. Is that true?
4 minutes.
I yield that back.
The time is yielded back. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the motion to proceed to H.R. 2832 is agreed to, and the clerk will report the measure.
Calendar number 166, H.R. 2832, an act to extend the generalized system of preferences and for other purposes.
Madam President,
The Majority Leader.
on behalf of Senators Casey and Brown, that's Brown of Ohio, and Senator Baucus. I call up amendment number 633.
The clerk will report.
The senator from Nevada, Mr. Reed, for Mr. Casey and others, proposes an amendment numbered 633. At the end, add the following. Title II, Trade Adjustment
Madam President.
Assistance.
The majority
I would
leader,
ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment be waived.
without objection.
I note before noting the absence of quorum, it's my understanding the Republican leader is on his way to the floor to offer an amendment, and I think everyone should understand there will be no business conducted until he shows up. So I would note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The Republican leader?
Are we in a quorum call?
Yes, we are.
Ask consent that further proceedings on a quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
And, Mr. President, I call up my amendment number 626, which is at the desk.
Clerk will report.
The senator from Kentucky, Mr. McConnell, for himself and others, proposes an amendment numbered 626 to amendment number 633. At the end, add the following. Title
I ask
3.
consent that further reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak about the amendment that the Majority Leader just called up. The Trade Adjustment Assistance Program in particular is what I'll focus on in my remarks. And I want to, first of all, thank the Majority Leader for his leadership on this issue and helping us getting started today. I'm particularly grateful for the strong leadership that Chairman Baucus has provided, the chairman of our Finance Committee. I want to thank him and his staff for their tireless efforts, not just in leading up to today, but over a long period of time, being such a strong advocate for this program. For many months, Chairman Baucus has led the charge to ensure that a strong trade adjustment assistance program is reinstated because it's important public policy for our workers to get them retrained and to make sure they have the skills needed to compete in such a tough economy. So I appreciate his work, and I also appreciate Chairman Baucus's work for many years fighting for workers, especially when their jobs are at risk, their livelihood, and their families' economic security. Because I think Chairman Baucus and so many others, my colleague Senator Brown from Ohio has been a tremendous leader on this issue as well. And one thing we all understand, whether we're Democrats or Republicans or independents, we understand that we are in the midst still in the grip of a jobs crisis all across the country. And it knows no geographic boundaries, and it knows no party. People are worried and concerned that their jobs will continually be at risk. And some, of course, have already lost their jobs. Almost 14.5 million Americans at last count. So in the midst of that crisis, it's critically important that we take the steps here to make sure that those who want to get back into the workforce, those who want to improve their skills or be retrained in some way or another, have that opportunity. And we know that in the next couple of weeks, the Congress will be taking up free trade agreements. But before we do that, before we consider the debate and before we consider those agreements, we've got to make sure that our workers have the protections they need to deal with the ravages of foreign competition. Let me revise that, the ravages of unfair foreign competition. And there are lots of ways to talk about this program and this issue, and some of them, frankly, get a little academic. The best way for me to understand the importance of trade adjustment assistance is very much consistent with the recent and unfortunate economic history of my home state of Pennsylvania. In our Commonwealth, just by way of one example, but it's the best example I can cite because of the numbers of workers affected. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in the 1970s and 80s, in a short period of time, in less than a decade, we had tens of thousands of steelworkers lose their jobs. Now, these were folks who worked in steel mills not just for a couple of years, but for many instances, decades. They would graduate from high school, go into the steel mill, and be virtually guaranteed of a job for the rest of their life. A good job with good benefits that they could support their family on. But then we know what happened to those workers in that industry. A lot of their lives were destroyed in the 1970s and 80s because of the decline of the steel industry. And it is at times like that, when someone who's worked their whole life and put all of their energies into a job, and that job goes away in a matter of weeks or months or a few short years, we have to make sure that we're there for them at that moment. And one of the ways we can be there for them is with trade adjustment assistance. I could point to in every member of the Senate could point to other examples as well. But I remember that horrific history in Pennsylvania where families were destroyed because of the loss of a job. So our trade policies have hit a lot of American workers very hard, and especially today we're seeing that. I mentioned Pennsylvania's manufacturing jobs as an example. According to an analysis by the Joint Economic Committee, of which I'm the chairman, from 1997 to 2010, just 13 years, manufacturing went from 16.4% of the gross domestic product or gross state product, I should say, of Pennsylvania, down to 12.1%. 13 years, just a short period of time, that kind of decline in manufacturing jobs, from roughly 16.5 to 12. In total, the job loss in Pennsylvania manufacturing was nearly 300,000 good-paying jobs. While trade adjustment assistance can't bring those jobs back, we can take steps to help those workers in a tough time as they transition to new employment, to new skills, and to new opportunities. Many displaced workers need considerable training to re-enter the labor market. You just imagine if any one of us did the same job for years or decades and then had to turn on a dime to adjust to the difficulties in the economy. It takes a while. According to a report by the Joint Economic Committee as well, many of these folks who have lost their jobs are much older than the rest of the workforce, and they need to gain a number of skills. 57% of current participants in the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program are 45 years of age or older. 57%. Trade Adjustment Assistance can better address the needs of these displaced workers by requiring training and giving additional time for workers to gain the skills necessary to re-enter the workforce to prepare to compete in a tough economy, in a world economy. We know these programs work. We know that based upon the JEC report that I cited earlier, 53% of those who participated in trade adjustment assistance programs were reemployed within 3 months. 53% reemployed within 3 months after leaving the program itself. These participants also found lasting employment, with 80% of those workers employed within the first 3 months remaining employed for an additional 6 months. We know that in 2009, several reforms were made to the program to reflect the realities of the modern workforce in the modern labor market. The amendment I offer today with my colleague Senator Brown of Ohio would reinstate these reforms, including the following, just by way of a quick summary. Number one, providing trade adjustment assistance benefits to service sector workers. Number two, covering workers whose firms shift production to non-free trade agreement partner countries. For example, China and India. We hear a lot of people talking around here about how we got to compete with China and India and keep our workers at a high skill level to do that. This is one way to do that. Number three, and finally, increasing the health care tax credit subsidy to 72.5%, and hereby addressing one of the most significant costs for those without a job, the cost of health insurance. We all know, and I know firsthand, the benefits of a strong trade adjustment assistance program based upon what's happened in Pennsylvania over many years. According to the Department of Labor, from May of 2009 through June of 2011, just a little more than 2 years, nearly 10,000 additional workers qualified for assistance due to these essential reforms in Pennsylvania. So the reforms that we made then in 2009 that we put in place have helped nearly 10,000 workers in Pennsylvania. If you look at it nationwide, 185,783 additional workers were certified for TIA participation because of those reforms. In total, trade adjustment assistance has assisted nearly 500,000 people over this time period. So our action this week will ensure that thousands of American workers will be able to count on retraining and other support if they lose their job through no fault of their own. More and more jobs and we all know this, but it bears repeating. More and more jobs have been sent overseas, leaving workers out in the cold. Nothing they did has caused outsourcing of their job, and yet they're left with the consequences, and their families suffer with those same consequences. To get jobs in new industries, workers need new skills. They need to be retrained and introduced to new skills. Trade adjustment assistance helps those workers hurt by foreign trade back to work, while also ensuring the employers have a skilled workforce at the same time. So finally, let me urge all my colleagues to support this amendment. Trade adjustment assistance has a long and proud history of bipartisan support in the Senate, and I hope we can continue that with this amendment and with this work. Those who have been affected by this know this story better than I or better than any of us. And it's about time that we stood with those workers when they and their families are suffering. And I would yield the floor.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that immediately following my remarks that it is all right with the distinguished senator from Ohio that the former trade representative, distinguished senator from the other distinguished senator from Ohio, Mr. Portman, be allowed to give his remarks.
Is there objection?
With your consent.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
I apologize to Senator Brown, but Senator Portman was promised that he'd be able to speak at 11:45.
Senator from Ohio.
I didn't quite hear the. I thought that Senator Hatch said that the senior senator from Ohio, then the junior senator from Ohio. Was that the UC request?
No, the UC request was for the senator from Utah, the junior senator from Ohio, then the senior senator from Ohio.
Okay, I didn't understand that from my conversations, but I do not object.
Mr. President, I strongly oppose the TAA amendment offered by my good friend and colleague from Montana, Chairman Baucus. But before I get into the specifics, I think it is important to put this debate in context. For years, I've been working to ensure that our pending trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea receive fair consideration in the United States Congress. Unfortunately, while I worked to get these agreements approved, others placed obstacles in the way. As a result, days, weeks, and months passed. Eventually, those months turned into years. Now, 4 years later, we're taking up the 6th renewal of trade adjustment assistance in the time that these job-creating trade agreements have languished. To me, it's highly ironic that we not only passed but expanded legislation to help workers who are allegedly harmed by trade agreements 5 times over the last 4 years, while we have yet to actually pass a single trade agreement. This March, President Obama made himself perfectly clear. Unless Congress agreed to spend more money for this pet trade priority, he would never send the trade agreements to Congress, and U.S. workers would never benefit from these agreements. Basically, the President held U.S. exporters hostage while he squeezed more spending out of Congress. Despite my deep disappointment in the President's failure to make these agreements a priority, I am pleased that we're having this debate today. Earlier this summer, the administration tried to jam this domestic spending program into the Korea Free Trade Agreement implementing bill. I strongly oppose this move. I believe it violated long-standing trade rules and seriously jeopardized approval of the South Korea agreement. I strongly encourage the White House to reconsider so we could have a robust debate with TAA considered solely on its merits. After all, if there is such a strong bipartisan support for the program, it should not be shielded from a debate and vote in an open forum. It appears the administration realized their position was untenable in the face of unequivocal Republican opposition. Thankfully, they chose to heed my advice, and today we have an opportunity to consider and fully debate TAA. If TAA passes the Senate, it should remove what we hope is the last obstacle that the President and his party place in front of consideration of the FTAs. We will see. To date, there is little evidence that the President is ready to finally step up to the plate, and it has not been for lack of effort on our part. House leadership made it clear the TAA will be considered in tandem with the FTAs as the President requested. Chairman Camp worked with Senator Baucus to develop a substantive deal on TAA as the President requested. Despite my deep reservations about the program, a number of my Republican Senate colleagues stepped up in support of the TAA compromise negotiated by Chairman Baucus and Chairman Camp, and even put their assurance in writing to support TAA. Before the August work period, Senators McConnell and Reid articulated a process for consideration of TAA and the FTAs as the President agreed, or requested, excuse me. Still, the administration refuses to provide any real assurance that it will actually send the pending free trade agreements to Congress for a vote. Now, I am very disappointed that we still have not heard definitively from the White House that they will send up the 3 FTAs. As for the Trade Adjustment Assistance Amendment before us today, I would like to summarize for my colleagues my concerns with the proposed expanded program and my objections to additional domestic spending for this program at a time of immense budget difficulties. First, there is little evidence that the TAA programs actually work. In fact, the opposite is true. Recent studies by professors at American University have found that the TAA program, quote, has no discernible impact on the employment outcomes of the participants, unquote. Now, if that is the case, I can't understand why we would expand this ineffective program. This summer, I was surprised to learn through an article in the Wall Street Journal that the Department of Labor is 4 years late on producing a report to Congress intended to demonstrate that the numerous trade adjustment assistance programs actually improve the employment outcome for TAA participants. Yet today we are considering an amendment to not only reauthorize the program for 3 years, but to make many of the benefits retroactive. Before we authorize $1 billion more in taxpayer spending, shouldn't we know if the program actually improves the job prospects for TAA beneficiaries? My friend and colleague from Oklahoma, Dr. Coburn, has made it a priority to identify and eliminate wasteful government programs. In its first report on the subject, the Government Accountability Office identified dozens of programs without any identifiable metrics on whether they actually succeeded in their mission. At a time of crushing budget deficits and increasing debt, Congress could easily start by eliminating these programs that have no proven track record of success. And in my opinion, we would have to put TAA at the top of that list. Consider that we are still waiting on the report from the Department of Labor on TAA's efficacy. I suspect that if the facts and the data clearly demonstrated benefits to workers participating in the TAA programs, the report would have been issued years ago. I'm sure this report will be issued, but only after TAA has been passed. I cannot support increasing funding for a program without any real evidence that it works. Some will argue that more people are using the program, therefore it must be working. I strongly reject that argument. Spending more money and certifying more workers does not mean a program is succeeding. It simply means that the program is expanding. And that is my second concern. Like many federal government programs, this domestic spending program continues to grow and grow. TAA money now goes to farmers, firms, community colleges, and service workers. Even more troubling, the critical nexus between job loss caused by trade agreements and TAA eligibility has been jettisoned. Today, all workers who lose their jobs allegedly due to, quote, globalization, unquote, could be eligible. As the global economy and global supply chains become more integrated, I suspect the potential number of beneficiaries and the cost of the U.S. taxpayer will grow enormously. Third, at a time when we need to severely constrain federal spending, this program increases it. In 2009, TAA was significantly expanded as part of the President's failed stimulus bill. Most of those increased costs are included in the TAA amendment before us today, but there may be additional hidden costs. Because the income support and the health coverage tax credit are entitlements, there is no cap on future spending. And although the health coverage tax credits are set to expire when Obamacare goes into full effect, I have serious doubts that they actually will. History shows again and again that it is much easier to create an entitlement than to end one. As I said, I suspect that this program, like most federal programs, will cost more than expected, especially after unemployment insurance returns to its traditional 26-week level, which will consequently increase the use of trade reallocation allowances and increase the TAA's program costs. Fourth, the program is fundamentally unfair. Suppose that one of our fellow Americans loses their job or his job because their factory burns down. Another loses his job because his or her company couldn't compete with a domestic competitor. And a third loses his or her job because of foreign competition. How can we tell two of our fellow Americans tough luck? You only can use the general job training and unemployment insurance programs while providing the third worker with a host of more generous training, income support, and health care benefits. This simply doesn't seem right to me. Why are we picking winners and losers amongst the over 14 million Americans looking for work? I am also troubled that although union workers are less than 7% of the private sector workforce, union workers receive over a third of TAA certifications. I don't see why we should support this vicious cycle. Unions drive industry after industry into bankruptcy by insisting on restrictive work rules and overly generous compensation and benefits plans, and the taxpayer gets to come in and clean up the mess by providing the now unemployed union workers with a new set of benefits far more generous than those received by others who are out of work. Unfortunately, encouraging vicious cycles appears to be an objective of this administration when it comes to TAA. Let me share with you another one. By now, most of you have heard of a company called Solyndra. Solyndra was held up by the President and his administration as an example of the wonders of the stimulus and its ability to transform taxpayer dollars into green jobs. Here's how President Obama described it, quote, "And we can see the positive impact right here at Solyndra. Less than a year ago, we were standing on what was an empty lot, but through the Recovery Act, this company received a loan to expand its operations. This new factory is the result of those loans," unquote. Well, the President was right about that. The new factory was a result of the taxpayer-provided loans. And according to the Wall Street Journal, those very same taxpayer loan guarantees also were a prime cause of Solyndra's bankruptcy. The, quote, "taxpayer dollars to green jobs," unquote, alchemy worked about as well as medieval attempts to turn lead to gold. But that's not the end of the story. To ensure the circle of taxpayer losses remains unbroken, the former Solyndra employees have now applied for trade adjustment assistance. That's right. As reported first by Americans for Limited Government and then confirmed by Investors Business Daily, Solyndra employees have applied to the Department of Labor for trade adjustment assistance. So to recap, the administration provides loan guarantees to a failing company and in the process saddles the American taxpayer with over $500 million in potential liability. These same loan guarantees precipitate the demise of said company, and this in turn justifies new taxpayer-funded benefits for the now unemployed workers, benefits that go far beyond and cost far more than those the other unemployed people in this country received. The administration likes to talk about the multiplier effect of new federal spending, but I don't think this is what they had in mind. For each initial wasted taxpayer dollar, the government multiplies the losses and manages to waste another quarter. Solyndra tried to make solar panels but ran up their costs far higher than even domestic competitors. Ultimately, with costs above the competition, the company failed. Of course, the failure was blamed on China, but if you cannot even outcompete U.S. companies, it wasn't foreign competition that ruined your business. It was simply a failed business model. During our hearing on the South Korea trade agreement, Deputy U.S. Trade Representative Moranis testified that the purpose of the TAA program is to help workers manage the transition to globalization and help workers trained to be able to take advantage of the opportunities presented in the new economy. Well, according to President Obama and Vice President Biden, green jobs like those found at Solyndra were supposed to be the jobs of the new economy. Now that new economy venture failed, those very same workers are going to be retrained at taxpayers' expense for other jobs in the new economy. Government under the President's green agenda picks winners and losers and then pays off the losers when it makes the wrong picks. Pardon the American taxpayer for jumping to the conclusion that this plain doesn't make sense. Let's not forget that a handful of states receive the lion's share of TAA money. Again, this is unfair on its face and represents a distorted allocation of federal resources. President Reagan did not graduate from an Ivy League college, and he was not the editor of any law review. But the man understood how the economy grows and what types of programs waste precious government resources. This was his assessment of TAA. Quote, "The purpose of TAA is to help these workers find jobs in growing sectors of our economy." There's nothing wrong with that, but because these benefits are paid out on top of normal unemployment benefits, we wind up paying greater benefits to those who lose their jobs because of foreign competition than we do to their friends and neighbors who are laid off due to domestic competition. Anyone must agree that this is unfair, unquote. That was President Reagan. I certainly do, as do most of my constituents who think the last thing this economy needs is another big spending program. Another important point is that TAA fuels the fire of the virulent anti-trade propagandists. TAA supporters say the program keeps faith with American workers and helps build support for trade. I think just the opposite is true. Unions and other anti-trade zealots gleefully use TAA data to make the case that trade causes outsourcing and job loss. After all, the number of trade dislocated workers is certified by the government. As the program has expanded to include more and more people and entities, including community colleges, firms, farmers, and fishermen, the myth that trade is bad for the American worker finds ready fodder and continues to build. Instead of helping build the case for trade, TAA certifications are used to show that trade is bad. In the end, TAA really is just a government subsidy for an anti-trade propaganda. Many of those dedicated to fighting a market-opening trade liberalization agenda and who are hostile to a thoughtful and ambitious trade policy cite each TAA certification and each TAA benefit conferred as further evidence that trade and trade agreements are bad for America. These same groups use TAA certifications and TAA workers to attack the companies who laid those workers off as outsourcers, even attempting to name and shame the CEOs of those companies. For goodness sake, why should we expand a program that arms the harshest trade critics with more fodder for their ill-informed and relentless attack on trade? Finally, TAA should move with TPA. Despite what many of my colleagues and many so-called trade experts say, TAA does not move with trade agreements. In fact, historically significant expansions and reforms to TAA have moved with omnibus trade legislation that included grants of trade negotiating authority to the President. There is a myth that TAA has always received strong bipartisan support. Again, the historical record does not bear this out. A simple review of a very helpful history of TAA provided by CRS this August shows just how controversial TAA has always been and continues to be, and confirms that TAA reforms traditionally move with TPA. Inexplicably, this President doesn't want TPA or Trade Promotion Authority, and the White House is actually encouraging Leader Reid and the Democrat senators to vote down a TPA amendment Leader McConnell will offer. Leader Reid and Chairman Baucus and the White House have also apparently asked the business community to oppose an amendment on TPA as well, despite the fact that the business community has uniformly supported the granting of trade negotiating authority to every president regardless of party. Well, this is all baffling to me. But I agree with Leader McConnell that the president needs TPA, whoever the president is, as soon as possible. And I can't imagine any president not wanting that authority. As I suspect the Democrats will vote down granting their president trade negotiating authority, I must also be inclined to vote against this TAA amendment. Much has been said about TAA, and that is the price for free trade agreements. But we are paving new and dangerous ground by holding 3 trade agreements hostage to expanded TAA. Each time we have tried to move these agreements, a new roadblock has been erected. And while we dilly and dally, our trade competitors take more of our market share around the world, and American businesses and farms lose more money and more jobs. Mr. President, there has to be a better way. I urge you to reconsider your trade priorities instead of expending your political capital on expanding federal government. Liberate the U.S. worker by accepting our offer to provide you with the authority to open new markets to U.S. exports. Our economy is in dire straits. Unemployment is sky high. and federal spending is out of control. Mr. President, we need your leadership, and we need it now. Mr. President, I yield the floor.